This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. All right, so you read the title of this video. You know what this video is going to be discussing, and I bet there's going to be a lot of instant reactions to this video. But first and foremost, I want to say this to just get this off jump. I'm a Browns fan. I cover the Cleveland Browns. I want the Browns to be successful. It makes me happy to see the Cleveland Browns win football games. What I am not is a fan of an individual quarterback, an individual narrative, or a fan of myself always being right 100% of the time. I want the Browns to be successful. And because that is the case, today what we're going to do, we're going to have a conversation about Plan B. Because Plan B is dangerously close to being on the table. And Plan B is JAMEIS Winston. The question is, can JAMEIS Winston be the next Geno Smith? Because for all the outcomes for Plan B, that is clearly the best possible outcome that could happen. That is the best way we could rebound from having to go to Plan B if Plan B becomes necessary. And right now, when you look at the Cleveland Browns, yes, they had a lot of issues on Sunday. They had issues being able to protect the quarterback. They had issues with their game plan. I thought they had some issues with the play calling. I thought they had some issues with some regular structural sideline stuff. They had issues with penalties. But the biggest issue, and the one that everybody has rightfully pointed out, was the play of the quarterback position. Now, this is not a video of me advocating that the Browns bench Deshaun Watson at this particular moment. But we do have to acknowledge that that is a conversation that is very close to being very valid about Deshaun Watson in a way that a lot of us didn't imagine it would have been before that week 1 performance. But when you throw up a 9 QBR, like I said in one of my videos earlier, when you throw up a 9 QBR and it's your second sub 20 QBR game, and you could throw out QBRs when you just look that bad for the third time in a 3-year time span, and you're the second most guaranteed quarterback in the NFL, I mean, it's not going to inspire a ton of faith. So the question today is, hey, if it came down to it, could JAMEIS Winston be the next Geno Smith, the next Renaissance project? We've seen this happen with guys like Geno Smith. Baker Mayfield comes to mind. And with the Renaissance Project, it's important to note that there probably was a reason that that Renaissance Project existed to begin with, and there were probably elements in those other places that existed that prevented those players from being successful. I know a lot of people are bringing up Baker Mayfield right now, but the truth about Baker Mayfield was it was never going to happen in Cleveland the way we wanted it to, because Cleveland just was not at the place to be able to foster that. When Baker Mayfield came in 2018, he got the keys. We were super excited about it. We gave him way too much, way too quickly, and it ended up being the sword that he fell on. And it took him 2 years of being at the bottom of the NFL to be able to figure out what he needed to fix from his own standpoint to become the quarterback that he looks like he's becoming in Tampa Bay. Same thing happened with Geno Smith, right? Got drafted, was a first pick of the second round, got the starting job immediately, and he kind of had to go through the doldrums a little bit to get back to where people kind of expected he'd be when he was originally drafted. Which brings me to somebody who does fit a lot of those traditional narratives of somebody who could be a successful Renaissance project, JAMEIS Winston. Because JAMEIS Winston's body of work is not terrible for a quarterback. It's not great. He throws way too many interceptions, or at least in his Tampa Bay days, he threw way too many interceptions. But it doesn't seem to me that his body of work screams that he is beyond a renaissance in his NFL career. I think there's a good chance if you put Jameis in a good situation, kind of like with what the Cleveland Browns have, where they have a good defense. The offensive line, once they're healthy, will probably be solid enough for a pocket passer to thrive in. I mean, a pocket passer last year in Joe Flacco was able to thrive with the offensive line that had Garon Christian and James Hudson. I'm sure that James will do fine in a system like that. But in order to kind of evaluate whether that can happen for Jameis or whether it's a realistic expectation to have of Jameis, you got to evaluate what went wrong with Geno Smith early in his career and figure out if some of those similar factors are at play for Jameis Winston. And when you look at Geno Smith's early career, I mean, it looks like a lot of quarterbacks who get drafted early who don't pan out. They get drafted into instability, right? If you want to use Geno Smith, you want to use Baker Mayfield as an example, both drafted into instability. Baker Mayfield 2018 had like a bunch of different coaches, bunch of offensive coordinators, never really got a good base for him to sit on. Same thing with Jameis Winston, same thing with Geno Smith, right? Got drafted into instability. By the time they're in their third year, there's a new coach, there's a new GM. Who knows how they feel about you? Who knows what the plan is for you? All of those things happen with all of those players, and pretty much any player you look at as a renaissance project. Drew Brees, Brett Favre, these things are kind of constants in it. It's the same thing with Jameis Winston. Because you look at why Jameis Winston struggled. You look at where he was and how he produced, right? He started out under Lovie Smith and then got switched to Dirk Koetter and then got switched to Bruce Arians. Now, the numbers that he produced, again, weren't bad numbers. They just weren't great numbers that you would expect from a number one overall pick. He goes to Bruce Arians and he throws for 5,000 yards. He throws for 30 touchdowns. He also throws for 30 interceptions. And we're familiar with what can happen with a guy like Jameis in that kind of a system where the interceptions skyrocket, because a similar thing happened with Baker Mayfield when he got switched to the Freddie Kitchens, Todd Monken system, which at that point was a bit more of an air raid, downfield throwing system, very similar to what Bruce Arians does. And that had similar results for Baker Mayfield. I believe he was second in the interceptions in that time period. So you see these numbers, you see what happened when he was around certain coaches, and then you wonder to yourself, hey, what if Jameis Winston was around a really solid offensive coach? Like Sean Payton when he was in New Orleans, right? A solid offensive coach. And then you look at Jameis's numbers when he was with a solid offensive coach. And I'm not going to lie, it's pretty encouraging stuff here. So these were the 7 starts that Jameis had in New Orleans. I believe they went 5-1 or 6-1 in that time span. I don't have the win-loss record on me. I think that's in a different slide. In that time span, in 7 games when he had under Sean Payton, I think he showed significant growth as a quarterback. He didn't throw for that many yards. He only averaged about 167 yards a game, which I do think is actually an interesting thing when we think about how the league has changed. Remember, like a lot of these guys, if you look at the week 1 passing yard totals, a lot of these guys are throwing for about 160, 170. Like the passing yards have just dropped significantly. And I think that's going to be a continuing trend. So I don't think that's going to be outside the realm of what's normal. He threw for 14 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions. So the one time he had a stable environment, a very good offensive coach, or a very well-respected offensive coach, he threw 14 touchdowns and 3 interceptions in 7 games. Didn't throw for that many yards, didn't have to. Didn't press too much, didn't make the big mistakes. The big question with Jameis Winston is, hey, we saw what he did early in his career. Is he just not capable of controlling himself? Is he not capable of taking what's there? Is he not capable of doing the boring things at the quarterback position? We all know Jameis can throw the ball downfield. We all know Jameis can throw a 50-50 ball. We all know Jameis can do those things, but can he do that? Well, that's evidence that he can do that. And if you include his rushing touchdown, he actually had 15 touchdowns and 4 turnovers. So it's a similar ratio there. And that's very encouraging, right? You want to see evidence if you're looking for a Geno Smith type situation that this player was more of a product of the environment than just bad in himself. This is a similar thing we did with Jacoby Brissett. And remember, Kevin Stefanski had a top 10 offense with Jacoby Brissett. That happened. That was 2 years ago. The Browns had a top 10 offense with Jacoby Brissett. Unfortunately, the defense, fell through the bottom that year. It was one of the worst defenses in the NFL that year. But they had a top 10 offense with Jacoby Brissett. We know that with the style of quarterback that JAMEIS is, Kevin's pretty good with that kind of guy, right? We've seen him do that with Jacoby Brissett. We've seen Kevin be able to work things out with Joe Flacco. We've seen him be able to squeeze wins out with even somebody like a Case Keenum. We know that Kevin has a history of having success and not renovating, but, creating these little mini renaissances with guys on a smaller scale. JAMEIS would certainly be a bigger scale and a more talented player than they've ever tried. And he would be a fit for what Kevin does, which the question with Deshaun Watson, outside of where his mind is right now, because I'm not 100% confident that Deshaun Watson's mind is 100% focused on football. It certainly does not appear that that's the case. And even the people who defend Deshaun Watson at this point and defend his play from week one admit that that might be the case when they say, hey, he played that bad because he had other stuff going on. I need my quarterback, if I want to win games, to be able to focus on football when they're playing football. I can't be out here wondering if something's going to go wrong in the quarterback's life to see if I can win a football game that week. It's ridiculous. And too many times that has showed itself to be the case with Deshaun Watson. It's why we got to consider this. Because the most concerning thing about what I saw from Deshaun Watson week one and what we could potentially see in week two, and I hope I'm wrong on this, but if he comes out and he plays bad again in week two, after all this news has come out about a new case for him, and from what I hear in practice, it's a pretty constant thing from the beat reporters. They all tell me when Deshaun Watson has bad news that breaks during the week, he plays horrible in practice that day. Like he'll be fine for like 2 weeks, something will break about a case, and then he looks terrible. I cannot have a quarterback that I got to make sure has a good day in order to do his job. Do you want to work with somebody like that? Like they can't do their job even if they're having a bad day? It's basic professionalism. You think I have great days every time I drop videos on this channel? I have bad days all the time. I go through stuff all the time. It doesn't show on the channel because I got to be professional. It wouldn't be acceptable for me doing this job as a YouTuber. It's nothing compared to being a quarterback. But if it's not acceptable for me, if it wouldn't be acceptable for you, if you were working fast food, or if you were working at Amazon, or if you were working a factory job, if it isn't, why would it be acceptable as an excuse for Deshaun Watson? That part aside, right? And if Deshaun can't focus on football, he has to take a sabbatical. He has to sit out. Now, again, let's get back to the point because I kind of deviated. Could Jameis Winston be the next Geno Smith? I think there's a lot of things that indicate he could. Let's go back to his numbers when he was under Sean Payton. I think these are very encouraging numbers, right? If you look at it from right here, right, his win-loss record and all of that, this is what he did. He had a 69.8 QBR that year. 69.8. Unfortunately, he got hurt right before he played the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But he had a 69.8 QBR that year. We just came off a game where our quarterback threw a 9.7 QBR. I would take a 69.8 QBR any day of the week. And I think the Browns could go pretty far with the 69.8 QBR any day of the week, right? And what impresses me the most about Jameis in that span was the reservedness that he had, right? The ability to kind of just take what's there, not try to make the big play and get what's there. Because in this too high revolution we're living through with NFL defenses, where NFL defenses are basically choking out offenses and saying no more deep stuff, right? You got to take what's underneath and you got to run the football to break us. That's what every defense in the NFL is doing right now, right? It's called the too high revolution. It doesn't mean that everybody's just playing cover two. What it does mean is that teams are committed more to keeping safeties over top. You're not seeing as many zero blitzes. You're seeing a lot more quarters coverage. You're seeing a lot more cover three, buzz match, all that stuff there. You're seeing a lot more safety staying high, not as high as Greg Williams had him, but safety staying high, protecting what's deep and prioritizing that, and then making you be patient into a mistake. That is what the too high revolution is. And the big concern with me with Jameis Winston, when I just think about the image that I have of Jameis when he was starting in Tampa Bay, is that a guy who's really going to thrive well in this too high revolution? But the work that he had in New Orleans when he did play while this too high revolution was going on shows me, nah, he can figure it out. That's what he did with Sean Payton. He looked like a different guy under Sean Payton. And I think if you give him the resources, if you commit to him, if you're the Cleveland Browns, Jameis can look like that in a Cleveland Browns uniform. I don't think it's crazy to think that that could happen. And if you compare what Jameis was doing to what Geno Smith is done pre-Renaissance, it's even more encouraging, right? The big time throw percentage for Geno Smith before the Seattle Renaissance was 4.2%. Jameis is 4.6. It's higher. The turnover worthy play percentage for Geno Smith was 6.3%. Jameis Winston, 5.7. That's lower. That's better. You look at the ages. Geno Smith was 31 when he made his renaissance. Jameis Winston, 30.6. Maybe there's something to that age, that maturity, right? Him not being the same guy he was when he was 25, 26 years old. We all know Jameis talks like an old head. He probably has picked up a lot of things that would make him better if he had to start versus what he was doing in Tampa Bay. And again, there's evidence that shows that he was on his way to doing that in New Orleans. We just look at the overall numbers, right? The Geno Smith overall numbers versus the Jameis numbers. Geno Smith had a lower completion percentage. And I'm just going to go off the percentages here because Jameis did play significantly more games than Geno Smith. Jameis had a better win percentage than Geno Smith. He also had a much higher touchdown percentage, 4.9 to 3.4, and a lower interception percentage. So even if we include what Jameis was doing early in his career, it still is lower than what Geno was doing in a higher QBR. Geno had a 41. Jameis had a 57.2. I think there's a good shot that Jameis, also a lower sack percentage too, which is important, right? But I think there is a good chance that Jameis Winston could see some kind of renaissance under Kevin Stefanski. That is the plan B if Deshaun Watson cannot get his act together, is Jameis Winston. And it could be plan B for a couple of years, kind of like how Geno Smith has been that for Seattle. Now, how far can you take that? That's going to be up to how good the renaissance looks. Right. If Kevin's able to push this to be a top 10 offense, I think it could take you to the playoffs most certainly. But as far as like in the playoffs, you know, we got to see who Jameis Winston is in the playoffs. And if he's going to stay disciplined and make the decisions you want to see at that point, right? Because Jameis still got them question marks that follow him from Tampa Bay. I can't be like, oh yeah, we could go to the Super Bowl with Jameis Winston. I got to see some proof of that. The same way I need to see some proof now that Deshaun Watson is capable of being anywhere close to that. I thought we weren't going to be having this conversation. I thought we were going to be having much different conversations, but this is where we're at. The bad news is that we're talking about plan B. I think we all wish we weren't talking about plan B. I think we all wish we were in a world where we're dancing on everybody and dunking on people who said the Browns would be terrible, all of that stuff, right? But if you're wondering what plan B is for the Cleveland Browns, plan B is actually pretty promising. I like plan B for the Cleveland Browns. As far as a plan B could be, I like it. Jameis Winston has a lot of promising numbers. He's not so old that if he has success, you got to call it a one-year thing. Like, there's a chance that Jameis Winston plays well if he has to play this season. You decide you want to just continue on with Jameis Winston. I believe he's on a 2-year contract, and live with that for a couple of years while you develop DTR. And then maybe at the end of that, you see what DTR has. Or you draft somebody in that time span and develop it. That's plan B for the Cleveland Browns. And as far as plan Bs go, it's not a bad one. It's much better than thinking like Josh Dobbs is going to have a Geno Smith type renaissance, or thinking that DTR is going to step in and become Brock Purdy. I think this has a higher chance of happening. That's my thoughts on that whole thing in the plan B for the Cleveland Browns. It sucks that we're talking about it. I certainly didn't want to be here this quickly, but this is where we're at. Got to be honest about where we're at right now with the quarterback position. There's many reasons on the field and off the field why the Browns should be considering their plan B. And again, the good news, plan B looks good. Again, Kevin Stefanski, top 10 offense with Jacoby Brissett. Jameis Winston, very similar to Jacoby Brissett, a little bit more talented. You would hope a similar result could happen. That's my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I know this might be a tough video for some people to watch because it's going to actually make some tough realizations about the team, but this is where we're at. Hope, and my one hope is that I hope that if it obviously looks like this is going down the direction that week 1 indicates, I really hope that the Browns, Jimmy, Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski, all can put their pride aside enough to be able to accept what is happening and make the move that's best for the football team. Because if we get another stinker on Sunday, we got to consider it sooner than later. And I don't want to wait until we're playing Baltimore to consider this. Like, if he drops another stinker next week, you got to consider it for week 3. That's where I'm at. That's how bad week 1 was. So that's my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Peace.